I will, I'm Brian Sengivata from Australia. I will speak for 1 hour and let me take you to the Sri Lanka north and east. The north and east under the Sri Lankan government, but under the Sri Lankan military and police. It is a military stroke police dictatorship where the military and police can do what they want with no accountability. It has more than 10 years and will go on for the foreseeable future if there is no international pressure on the Sri Lankan government. This pressure will have to be generated by those outside Sri Lanka. It may even be a violation of the Sri Lankan constitution since there is no provision for the setting up of a military stroke police state in a part of the island. This will have to be challenged by constitutional experts outside Sri Lanka. It is a situation that the Sri Lankan government can correct with the stroke of a pen. The pressure to do this will have to come from outside. Let me deal with the size of the military in the Tamil North and East. There is a massive military presence in the North and East. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the military balance, the Sri Lankan military has 255,000 active members. This is larger than Saudi Arabia, 227,000, France, 204,000, Israel, 170,000, and the United Kingdom, 147,000. This miserably poor country with no external enemies has 255,000 active members. It is outrageous. The ratio of soldiers to civilians in the northeast is 1 is to 5. In Vavonia, it is 1 is to 3. Um, the people for uh, the Pearl and the Adiaram Center for Policy Research in a paper titled Normalizing the Abnormal Militarization of Mullaitivu says that the ratio of military to civilians in Mullaitivu is 1 is to 2. That is one uh, uh, member of the armed forces to 2 civilians. There is no place in the world which is so highly militarized. The military and police are responsible for all the serious violations of human rights of the Tamil people in the area. International intervention is mandatory for humanitarian reasons. If nothing is done, the Tamil people in the area will simply wither away since they have no means of survival, no land to cultivate, no sea to fish, no jobs, and unable to set up a business since all of these have been taken over by the armed forces. The Tamil tigers have been crushed. The question is the justification for such a massive military presence. Who is the enemy? Since there is no justification, the military will have to be withdrawn and the police recruited from the local Tamil population. This is imperative and urgent. It will not happen without international pressure. Turning to the military getting involved in non-military activities. The armed forces have non-military uh, gone from non-military commercial activities. Have gone into non-military commercial activities. They are engaged in large-scale property development, construction projects, and business ventures such as travel agencies, holiday resorts, restaurants, and numerous cafes in the north and east. The military has no presence in business activities. This non-military activity is having a serious impact on civilian life and must be stopped. This will not happen without international pressure on the Sri Lankan government. Turning to the military intervention in local civilian economy, the military intervention is operating its own business, employing civilians in military and civil society projects, and getting into private sector investment. I've got no time to go into all this. I can deal with one or two. The military operated businesses. Since the end of the armed conflict in 2009, the military has its own commercial activities. They range from agriculture and animal husbandry, tourism, and commerce. Dealing with agriculture and animal husbandry, of the 13 farms operated by the military, 6 are in the northeast. These farms grow paddy, corn, vegetables, fruit, coconuts, sugarcane, peanuts, oranges, areca nuts, cinnamon, banana, jack, and seasonal crops. They produce dairy produce, uh, poultry, and cattle. The product is sold well below market prices, making it impossible for the local farmers to compete. Tourism and war museums. In Mullaitivu alone, the military runs at least 5 hotels and restaurants. Two are operated, two were opened in 2012, a mere 3 years after the end of the armed conflict, in an area where hundreds of Tamils are looking for their loved ones. Two resorts are located on the Nantikada Lagoon, which provides visitors with a war tourism experience directed by the military from their perspective. All the monuments and museums carry signs stating that the armed conflict was a humanitarian rescue operation by the military to save the Tamils from the LTTE. There is no mention of the tens of thousands of Tamil civilian casualties. I would now like to get on to the military getting involved in education and schools. Of serious concern is the military getting into education to generate, to teach military design curriculum. This is also concerned that the military is appointing teachers with higher salaries to teach this curriculum. The military does not have the strength, the training to get into these areas, and children who are at the receiving end may suffer. I have seen all this in medicine when I was a don in the medical faculty in Pennsylvania. New recruits trained in medicine and were competent in treating patients were suddenly appointed as medical teachers. They had no experience in teaching, which is entirely different to treating patients. There were several complaints from the medical students, so I decided to attend some of these lectures. They were dreadful, and I had to redo most of them and insist that lecturers in medicine, in addition to having knowledge in medicine, had to be trained in teaching. Getting on to the absolute need to have human rights monitors in the Tamil areas. Where there is a violation of human rights, such as rape by the armed forces, police, and the paramilitary groups working with the government, there is nowhere that the victim, a Tamil woman or girl, can lodge a complaint. To go to the police is not only useless, but it might be dangerous. In my book on sexual violence, the details on which I will give you at the end of my talk, uh, I have said that if the victim goes to the police station or the army camp, there is a risk that the victim or whoever accompanies the getting raped or the details taken for a midnight visit by the police and the armed forces. The claim that international human rights groups such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and International Crisis Group are allowed in the country is not good enough. If when these organizations visit the Tamil areas, they are accompanied by members of the armed forces or police, notes are taken of what was said and what and to whom it was said. This happened when the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navanita Pillai, visited the area. Before her visit, people were told that any complaints to her would be noted and the consequences would be serious. There is no alternative to having such places manned by Tamil civilians to whom victims of human rights can complain without fear. It will take years before this until the armed forces are removed uh, uh, from the area and Sinhalese police are replaced by Tamil police. The UN Human Rights Commission for Human Rights Acts. On 27 January 2012, the UN Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, issued a damning report on Sri Lanka's human rights situation, urging the international community to take strong action to prevent another human rights targeted sanctions and punitive contains a devastating and unprecedented critique of the handling of human rights in Sri Lanka, and its recommendations have escalated the possible intervention of the Council beyond anything that has been suggested to date. The logic of this escalation is based on the High Commissioner's conviction of an accelerated deterioration in civic, political, minority, religious, and other democratic rights under the present administrative regime, which he explicitly urgent attention. For the first time ever, she called on member states of the Human Rights Council of Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The body is set up by the Rome Statute in 1998 to uh, try perpetrators of war crimes, genocide, and violation of human rights law. In a warning to Sri Lankans accused of war crimes and human rights violations, the High Commissioner urged member states to strongly consider what he said. Given the demonstrated inability and unwillingness of the government to advance accountability at the national level, it is time for international action to ensure justice for international crimes. States should also pursue investigations and prosecutions in the national courts under accepted principles of extraterritorial or universal jurisdiction of international crimes committed by all parties in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's contribution to the UN peacekeeping operation must be kept under review. The High Commissioner also urged the Council to support a dedicated capacity to collect and preserve evidence for future accountability process. What happens now? Remember that the Human Rights Council has some 47 members who have to act. They can decide, and the Commissioner says, Human Rights Watch has already referred to this, and I will deal with that in a minute. What can you do for doing what she has done? You can check with the country you live in whether it is represented on the council, and if it is, contact the representative and say that you are concerned. They must act. To do nothing is not an option. Human Rights Watch endorsed the recommendations of the High Commissioner for targeted sanctions on Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan officials credibly accused of war crimes and for the establishment of an independent international mechanism to investigate violations of human rights law. In a 93-page report, it warned that the UN will lose credibility if it fails to adopt a tough resolution at the 46th UN Human Rights Council meeting. There has been a mass relocation of Sinhalese from south to the Tamil north by the government. What is not widely known is that the Sinhalese military and the police who have quit their jobs are being relocated in the north with their families. The result is a massive increase in the number of Sinhalese in the Tamil north and east. If this continues, the north and the east will be dominated by Sinhalese. This will not only be reversible, as we have seen in Ampare in the east, which was the Tamil area that has been Sinhalese. The long-term objective of accelerated Sinhalization of the Tamil areas is to destroy the Tamil homeland and establish a monoethnic identity throughout the island, a Sinhala Buddhist nation. Getting on to Buddhistization. Buddhist temples and structures are proliferating in an area where there are no Buddhist civilians. The only Buddhists are a bo tree is planted in an area which is then declared a Buddhist sacred site. A Buddhist temple is then erected. The British Tamils Forum, BTF, has an excellent book proliferating Buddhist structures in Tamil homeland, sowing the seeds of disharmony. Education in Jaffna, this is very important. Dr. Da Somasundaram, professor of psychiatry in Jaffna, delivered an important lecture, A Lost Generation of Tamil Youth. What he said was alarming. 70% of students fail the grade 5 examination annually. 50% fail the GC O-level exam. Of those who even few who enter universities are not assured of a bright future. The university system that was doing reasonably well up to 1980 has deteriorated drastically due to the general chaos of war, poor resources, poor support from the state, and the loss of able academics and teachers with the general brain drain. This must-read publication is on the net. The difficulty in getting into universities is compounded by the fact that large numbers of Sinhalese from the south are getting into the Jaffna University. Some of them qualify for university education, others get in because they know the university in the late 1960s. I'm well aware that a significant number of medical students are Tamils from Jaffna. There is no place that I know of in any part of the world that has produced more professionals than Jaffna. As such, what is going on in Jaffna at the moment is an absolute disaster. Jaffna will take decades, if ever, to get back to where it was at the top of the educational league table. Of equal concern is that parents who can afford to do so send their children abroad. Once trained, they are not going to return. This serious brain drain will affect not only Jaffna. Poverty and unemployment are higher now in the northern province than anywhere else in Sri Lanka. At the Northern Provincial Council second budget reading, the Chief Minister said that out of the 25 districts in Sri Lanka, Kilnochi was the poorest. Mullaitivu, which was the previously the poorest, is now number 2 on the list of poverty by district. Jaffna is the 5th poorest district. The level of unemployment is also highest in the northern province than in any other province. Turning to sexual violence in the north and the east, sexual violence has increased in the northern province. Women widows in their 20s are sexually assaulted at work. Women teachers are sexually assaulted in school. Unwanted pregnancies and teenage pregnancies are an issue. Many men come to Jaffna from other parts, have relationships with women, marry them, and then leave them. Society shuns these women as seeing them as indecent. Sex is a taboo subject in Tamil culture. As such, sex education is not taught or taught poorly in what is still a male-dominated society. Such issues are difficult to deal with. In my book on sexual violence, the details of which I will give you at the end of this talk, a book that was 100 after it was first published in 2015. The next edition, 4 years later, in March 2010, was 264 pages. I get on to continuing violation of human rights. This continues to be an involuntary there continues to be involuntary disappearances, abductions, arrests without warrant, illegal detention at unknown sites, and failures to release those who are being held without charge or trial. In the 2018, 17-18 Amnesty International annual report and read it for yourself. Getting on to the Prevention of Terrorism Act. The Prevention of Terrorism Act has been condemned by every rights group in the world. It has been used for extensive violation of human rights and for human rights, numerous arrests, detention without charge or trial, disappearances, sexual violence and torture, and much more. The Sri Lankan government has committed, uh, the Sri Lankan government was committed at the United Nations Human Rights Council 30/1 in October 2015 to repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act and replace it with anti-terrorism legislation in line with The Act was drafted by the Sri Lankan government. Rather than reining in the PTA's definition of terror, the PTA expandedly criminalizing any activity that threatens the unity of Sri Lanka. This includes gathering information to supply to a third party deemed by the Sri Lankan government as a threat to about human rights being accused and charged with terrorism is very real. In 2018, the Sri Lankan cabinet approved the CTA, which was jammed by civil society groups because it failed to meet international standards and leaves the door open for future abuses. Getting on to torture, torture by the Sri Lankan military and police is widespread, especially in the north and the east. It has been well documented by the Truth and Justice Project, ITJP, administered by the South African human rights activist Yasmin Sooka. Unstopped 2016 and 17 Torture in Sri Lanka is one of several publications by this International Truth and Justice Project. The site has a detailed account of Joseph Camp. Joseph stands for Joint Ammonia town in the north. It is the main torture center for the Tamil area. Torture rooms and equipment used for torture are clearly seen. There are more than 40 torture centers in Sri Lanka run by the police and the armed forces, including the notorious Criminal Investigation Department torture site in Colombo, the dreaded fourth floor, where torture has been well documented. The Asian Human Rights Council, Asian Human Rights Commission puts this well. It says torture is part of the day-to-day operation of the Sri Lankan state. Therefore, it is no exaggeration to say that Sri Lanka is a torture republic. I'll now get on to mass destruction. We will have to know where the K-4 jets, the massive bombers, the multi-rocket rocket launchers, and the helicopter turning to national reconciliation. I have published a detailed paper which is on the net. Why national reconciliation in Sri Lanka is not possible. The government, past and present, have no interest in national reconciliation, a term used to bluff the international community. Genocide of Tamil people. I have dealt with this in detail in an article which is on the net. It is not only physical genocide, but cultural, linguistic, religious, economic, and structural genocide. The terms have been defined and justified in my article. Turning to the need to establish valid legal and justice departments in the north and the east. Court cases, especially when the accused is a member of the armed forces or police in the northeast, have been transferred to the Sinhala south. This makes it difficult, if not impossible, for the victim or witnesses, all of them Tamils, to go to the area located, which may be miles away, and where the proceedings could be in Sinhala, a language they do not understand. As a result, the case is usually dropped and the culprits get away with no conviction. This is unacceptable. Court cases that come up for hearing in the north and the east must be heard in courts in that area. Getting to chaos in Jaffna. It is not widely appreciated by the outside world that the social structure in Jaffna is chaotic. Drugs and alcohol. Drugs are being brought by the Navy from Kerala in South India and sold in Jaffna. Illicit drugs are freely available and sold even to people as young as 11 years old. The increased use of drugs has increased the crime rate massively. Drug users commit rape, murder, and all sorts of crimes. Drug dealers are openly selling drugs. They are being sold in villages, creating enormous village issues. There is only one hospital that offers alcohol and drug rehab services. There clearly needs to be more. And without them, social issues uh, will uh, uh, become a serious problem. There has been a marked increase in domestic violence since the end of the armed conflict. Drugs, alcohol, husband being unemployed and not earning enough money, and the husbands believing that uh, their wives are having an affair, which is untrue, are becoming issues. Women tolerate this for the sake of their children because they do not want to lose the respect of the community. Uh, Women rarely report these cases to the police for fear that there will be no action. When the situation becomes critical and they cannot bear the physical violence, they seek help from non-government organizations, but these are few and poorly resourced. The Sinhalese police. The police are 95% Sinhalese and do not know Tamil. This language problem means that many cases go unreported. For example, if a case is reported, the process is long drawn and often ineffective. Often the police tell people to come back since they do not have a translator. The message finally gets through that it is an exercise in futility. The corrupt police and military. The police and military are corrupt. The Sri Lankan police are reported to be the most corrupt in the world. The police, army, and navy are involved drug with the drug plaguing Jaffna. As such, they are not trustworthy, particularly and involved the army and the police. Some of this is dealt with in my book on sexual violence. Counseling is in short supply. There are only one or two non-government organizations offering counseling in villages. As a result, family problems related to the abuse of women, children, and domestic violence are not addressed. As a result, serious mental health problems such as depression and post-traumatic stress disorder are not addressed. Not surprising, states that suicide rates in Jaffna are high and rising. Cultural issues. People in the northern province, especially Jaffna, have been hardworking and disciplined. This is no longer the case. During the war, the northern province was cut off from the rest of the country economically and socially. After the war ended, things previously unobtainable became freely available. So was money, especially from abroad. From having access to nothing, they had access to almost everything. People do not know how to handle this. As was earlier stated, people only bought as mentioned above, education has suffered seriously. Adults repeatedly say that children lack motivation to study and expect parents to buy things which they can't afford. This has resulted in serious family problems. The caste system, which was uh, virtually stamped out by the Tamil Tigers, has returned. This is particularly so in Jaffna. Many of the low caste people are poor. Some of the children who need tuition do not have the money to pay for tuition fees. I'm setting up a fund to collect money to be sent to these very worthy cause. Money will initially be collected by me in Brisbane and sent to one of three people in the north and the east. Reverend Father Mangala Raja of the Catholic Church in Jaffna, Justice Vigneswaran, member of Parliament, or Sivajalingam, a member of the TNA. They will contact the various schools to get information on who needs tuition. When they identified, I will send the money by me. If this does not work out, the money will be returned to those who sent it. It will not be used for any other purpose. Women-headed families. There are 69,000 women-headed families in the northern province, of whom 30 are building houses that are of little use. If this money is given to families, they could build larger and more useful homes for far less money. Many of these women do hard labor to support their families. Some of their children also work from an early age to support their families. Children having to work has an adverse effect on schoolwork. Turning to the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution, this must be scrapped. Amendment states, and I quote, no person shall directly or indirectly, inside or outside Sri Lanka, support, espouse, promote, finance, encourage, or advocate the establishment of a separate state within the territory of Sri Lanka. In other words, one cannot even discuss a separate state for the Tamils. The penalty for violating this constitutional amendment is severe. It includes confiscation of movable or immovable property. While those outside Sri Lanka do not need to worry about this nonsense, those inside Sri Lanka do have to worry because the full force of the law will be applied. It might even be applied to those outside Sri Lanka who have property in Sri Lanka. It is imperative that this absurd constitutional amendment be removed. A referendum in the north and the east. It is important to have a referendum in the north and the east to ask the people what they want. Are they happy with what is going on, or do they want a separate Tamil state, Tamil? It has to be a properly conducted referendum. To have a poorly conducted it has to be UN conducted referendum with the UN forces replacing the Sri Lankan forces as was done in East Timor. If the result is we want a separate state, then the UN will have to deliver as was done in East Timor. The more I think about this, the less I'm convinced that a referendum will ever take place. For an effective referendum to take place in the north and the east, the Sri Lankan government will have to cooperate. I cannot see any referendum. The only way an effective referendum will take place is other countries. The only country that might do so is India, or to be more specific, Tamil Nadu. However, India is run from Delhi, not from Tamil Nadu. As such, hoping that India will act is futile. Tamils without a leader. After the death of S.A.B. Sivanagam in the 70s, there has been no Tamil civilian Tamil leader worth talking about. The TNA is a joke, and the Sri Lankan government treats it as not the Tamil people who elected it. For several years, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Mannar, Right Reverend Dr. Rayappu Joseph, was the unofficial leader of the Tamil people. I was worried about him and wrote an entire booklet, Sri Lanka, Right Reverend Rayappu Joseph and others in danger. He had a devastating stroke and is unable to speak. Whether this was due to medical causes or whether he was poisoned, I don't know. What I do know is that the Tamils have got an invaluable leader. Who their leader is something that the Tamil people on the ground there will have to sort out. It is not for me to comment on. The potential for development of the Tamil North and the East. There are several economists who have said that the Tamil North and the East have the greatest potential for development. It is this that the Sinhalese armed forces in the north and the east owned the 180-acre farm, many hotels and resorts, a golf course, 3 cricket stadiums, a ferry service, 2 whale watching tours, 2 airlines, and numerous cafes that dot the roads in the north and the east. These are just the ones that we know about. Some of these can be seen in the outstanding publication by the British Tamil Forum that I have referred to. The land for all this has been seized from the Tamil people without compensation. Economy is in crisis, inheriting large budget deficits and dangerously high debts the Sri Lankan government has been unable to deliver. Sri Lanka's debt has risen from 120 billion in 1981 to 10,500 billion in November 2016. Export earnings are declining. There has been a collapse in the state's income from 23% of GDP in 1996 to 3% in 2014. There has been a sharp fall in Sri Lankan production and widening inequality of income distribution. Nimal Sandaratne from Peradeniya in Sri Lanka has written an extensive analysis of the financial crisis which is on the net. Else is sending money and state that aid will be provided there is a marked improvement in human rights. This is what the expatriate Tamil community and others concerned with human rights in Sri Lanka should be doing. The Chinese will, of course, not cooperate. As much money as Sri Lanka wants to be supplied by China, as it was when Rajapaksa was last in power. This is money that Sri Lanka can never repay. So the land will be sold to China as happened in the south. More will be sold this time, and Sri Lanka will become a Chinese colony, one of Sri Lanka's string of pearls. Given this economic crisis, a well their rights is very important. The responsibility to protect. The responsibility to protect is a global political commitment which was endorsed by all members of the UN at the 2005 World Summit to prevent genocide, crimes against humanity, and human rights and crimes against humanity. R2P is based on the premise that sovereignty is a responsibility to protect all its populations from mass atrocities and human rights violations. Peace and security, human rights law, human rights and armed conflict. Clearly, it is applicable to the north and the east, where the Tamil people are in need of protection. Anne Marie Slaughter from Princeton University called R2P the most important shift in our concept of sovereignty since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Louis Armstrong from International Crisis Group said that the responsibility to protect is the most important and imaginative doctrine to emerge on the international scene for decades. Professor Damien Kingsbury from Deacon's University in Australia has written an entire book, Sri Lanka and the Responsibility to Protect Politics, Ethnicity, and Genocide. I will leave it to lawyers to decide where to go from here. As for me, I will not be surprised. Active Buddhist monk. Politically active Buddhist monk has been the curse in Sri Lanka for years. It is one of them who assassinated SWRD Bandaranaike in the first political assassination in Sri Lanka. Somarama Thero, who shot the Prime Minister, was convicted of murder and hanged. Buddharakkhita Thero, who was the mastermind behind the assassination, was also convicted of the power of these monks is enormous. Buddharakkhita Thero is a whiskey drinking monk who saw to it that Bandaranaike appointed his mistress, Vimala Vijayawardena, as a minister. I know all this because Bandaranaike is a close relative of mine, and he told me all this. These Buddhist monks can block every attempt by every government saying that it is a sellout of a single Buddhist country to the Tamils. They are now getting even more violent. The Bodu Bala Sena, Buddhist powerhouse, led by a very violent man in yellow robes who should have been arrested for threatening the police and even ministers in the government, remains at large. In 2000, in March 2018, President Sirisena declared a state of emergency after violent Buddhist monks attacked violence will continue. With some 20,000 Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka, the possibility of acceptable solutions to the problems facing the Tamil people is not good. Returning land to civilian owners, continuing land grabs. Under the previous Rajapaksa government, 70,000 acres of land were under military occupation. Only 2,000, that is 3.5%, has been released by the Sirisena government. This is only 3.5% land. Fertile land is being acquired even today, in 2021. Tamil people are unable to exist since agriculture and fishing are not possible. This land grab and singularization, which I will deal with in a moment, are making the Tamil people destitute in their own homeland. The return of land to civilians is mandatory and urgent. Unless the international community, especially the donor community, exert the necessary pressure, this will not happen. The Pearl publication, which I have referred to, has important points it has to make. It says that although the government made a handful of land releases in 2015 and 16, land grabs continue. Will not change in the north, and that despite the government's commitment that lands in the north to be returned by 2018, the military will not return even an inch of land to their rightful owners. In November 2017, President Sirisena reassured military officers that government would not release land needed for national security. In 2017, July, the government released in Mailadi Harbor, but returned the land which was uninhabitable after 27 years of military occupation. Moreover, the majority of homes, part of the harbor, and the TB hospital have remained in this area. There is also evidence of ongoing land grabs, with the Navy giving notice in October 2017 that it has acquired 672 acres in Mulewaka. It is also acquiring private land in Kites. Military continued expanding in Wani, Mullaitivu, and Kilinochchi, with new appropriations occurring as recently as March 2018. Harassment of Tamil civilians living in the military stroke police state. The presence of the military in the military area has profound impact on Tamils living there. The military and police continue to harass and intimidate Tamils in the northern region. Civilians who protest repression extends to those who commemorate Tamils who died during the armed conflict. In 2017, organizations of both organizers of both Mulewakal Remembrance Day, and Mahavir Ranal were intimidated. Government agents have targeted Tamil civilians for their Tamil advocacy, harassing uh, their families and intimidating by taking photographs. Resettlement of Tamil civilians is a farce. 3 years after the election of President Sirisena, only 3,996 people have been resettled. As of October 2030, men internally displaced. Fear and insecurity in the Tamil North and the East. The overwhelming problems facing the Tamils in the North and the East is fear and insecurity. They are justifiably afraid of the Sri Lankan armed forces, police, and Sinhalese who have been settled there and are supported by the armed forces and police. Tamil paramilitaries working with the government and alarmingly fear of each other, since no one is confident as to what is told to someone is not conveyed to someone else for mind to give. Living in insecure homes is another major problem. Armed forces and the police can kick the door down if there is one and assault those inside, including children. A photograph of one of these is in my book on sexual violence. Until the armed forces are removed from the north and the east, this fear and insecurity will remain. It will not happen unless there is a massive interest. There must be informers, spies if you like, on the ground in the Sri Lankan north and the east. They can be. Can they be found? Yes, they can be, but they have to be paid. I have strongly addressed the organization to which I belong, the Transnational Government of Tamil that the need for such funds. Business organizations, especially in Canada, will provide the funds if they know what the money is going to be used for. Boycott. Say no to Sri Lanka was operative some time ago. Several ANC leaders who told me that the two things that were successful in overthrowing the apartheid regime were boycott of the economy and boycott of sports, especially cricket. These proven methods will support for those who work. There is an absolute need to support people like Pearl and ACPR who have produced outstanding work. To support Pearl and get them to send another team of investigation to Sri Lanka is crucial. To get people of importance to visit the North and the East, get your member of parliament and others in high places to provide this. India, or rather Delhi, has a crucial role to play which it has not done. This is why I have urged the organization with which I have worked to set up an office, however small, in Delhi and in Tamil Nadu to supply the necessary information about the current situation in Sri Lanka. Such an office, the Tamil Information Center, existed in London many years ago under Kandaya Kantasamy and was very important in providing information. I visited the center and was greatly impressed by the work they do. Get involved. It is most important that people get involved. There are some 1.5 million expatriate Tamils in the world, living and working in the most powerful country in the world. They are by far the most powerful force that the Tamils in the north and the east have got. If instead of fighting with each other or saying Tamils want Tamilism, they focused on the deteriorating human rights situation in the north and the east, a lot can be achieved. All of us who support the struggle of the Tamil people want Tamilism. However, with rapid singleization of the Tamil north and east, there might be no Tamilism. Hence the need for urgent action to act now, tomorrow, maybe too late. It is time to look at the human rights of the uh, people in the north and the east and ask the question, looking at the human rights of the Tamil people in the north and the east, are they better off now than they were, say, 15 years ago? The answer is worrying. it is no. They are worse off, probably much worse off. In that case, it is time to rethink the entire issue and address the problem. Launching a worldwide action program. A worldwide action program will have to be launched right now to monitor the human rights situation in the Tamil Northern region periodically report back to the High Commissioner, uh, Michelle Bachelet, in view of her conviction of an accelerated uh, deterioration in civic, political, minority, religious, and other democratic rights, and to call for international action. It is the very least that they expect the Tamils now, 1.5 million people, and others concerned in what is going on can do. Can anything be done? Something will have to be done to save Sri Lanka in general, the Tamils in particular. On the 14th of September, 15,000 people took to the street in the largest protest ever since the armed conflict. Called Let Tamils Rise, thousands of Tamils from all 8 provinces in the north and the east came to protest in Jaffna, which was ground to a halt. Despite the power on show, they were protesting against the military occupation of the north and the east, the chauvinistic policy of the Sri Lankan people, which was displayed. I wrote a piece about this, which is on the net. On the 10th of February 2017, there was another massive protest, this time in Jaffna, in the in the constitutional proposal. On the 12th of October 2017, there was another complete stoppage in Jaffna. Showdown against the government continues to practice inaction, duplicity, and political chicanery. These protests must be supported. There are 1.5 million Tamils living in the all-important countries in the world. These expatriate Tamils are the strongest force that those in the Tamil North and the East in Sri Lanka have got. Unfortunately, this massive force is divided for petty reasons and are recently facing apathetic and problems which basically cannot be justified. What can those of us do? What is the military stroke police state? People cannot exist if their lands are taken over and their occupation, agriculture, and fishing are prevented. Tamil people in this area do not live, they merely exist. Even that is becoming difficult. Jaffna is awash with drugs and alcohol brought by the Navy from India. Those who disbelieve this must go to Jaffna and talk to the people. To go there and live in a five-star hotel or with family and then to say that all is well is just nonsense. Torture is taking place in at least 40 sites, mainly in police stations and the army camps. The Joseph camp in the middle of Vavuniya and the fourth floor in Colombo must be visited, and even if they are told that they are not tourist attractions. What has been done in apartheid South Africa, it was to isolate South Africa. This has to be done in Sri Lanka. Say no to Sri Lanka is worth supporting. Goods and services in and out of Sri Lanka, especially tourism, must be. There are many places with golden beaches and sea such as Spain. The publication of the dozen DVDs I have recorded on the Tamil struggle must be distributed. The fact that unless especially the aid donors act, the Tamils will cease to exist as a people. That is genocide. The best way to find out what others in positions of power to go there and see what is going on. This is crucial. You must know now. Tomorrow may be too late for the Tamil. If you go to Sri Lanka, if you cannot go to Sri Lanka, let Tamil asylum seekers get to you and listen to what they check the outstanding publications of Yasmin Suka, which I have referred to. Read what international human rights organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and International Crisis Group have published. More important than all, get involved. The future of an entire nation, the Tamil nation of Sri Lanka, is at stake. Before I close, I would like to suggest a few topics for future meetings. One is genocide in Sri Lanka. Then, what the majority Sinhalese must know. Thirdly, the British and Commonwealth responsibility. Why national reconciliation is not possible in and the Sri Lankan government, the future of the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to take them. Thank you.